Good morning. This is Rick Gleason coming to you from the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington, from the heartbeat of worker health and safety. And we have a special guest who's actually in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and she works for NIOSH. So here with me today is Dr. Maryann D. Alessandro, and she's the director of the NIOSH National Personal Protective Technology Lab. And they're part of NIOSH, which we usually just use the acronym, but the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. They've probably been around for 45 plus years now, and they help to create safe work environments with their research and guidance in the field of occupational safety and health. So in 2001, NIOSH created a National Personal Protective Technology Lab, commonly referred to as NPPTL. And this lab was created to kind of do scientific research and develop guidance and respond to requests for health hazard evaluations for millions of workers who rely on personal protective equipment in America. Maryann provides leadership for that group at NIOSH's PPT program, where she aligns personal protective technology initiatives with the needs of the user. She has served as a catalyst for aligning surveillance and research with conformity assessment needs and design to improve workplace safety and health. Prior to joining NIOSH in 2003, she had a short academic career at the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Bioengineering, and also served 15 years with the U.S. Army in biomedical sensors and communications and intelligence systems research. And she holds an electrical engineering degrees from Florida Institute of Technology, a bachelor's degree, Fairleigh Dickinson University, a master's, and Georgia Institute of Technology, a PhD. So, Maryann, thank you so much for being here today and kind of explaining to us what your program is. So, could you help us out by just describing for us what is conformity assessment?
Certainly, Rick, and thank you for having me today. I'm delighted to be here. Conformity assessment is the process of determining if a particular personal protective equipment product actually conforms to an established performance standard. And it is something that's very important because within the PPE community, it ensures that products will provide the expected level of protection. So conformity assessment processes, they increase the user's confidence that their PPE will meet manufacturers' claims and also protect them from workplace hazards.
Got it. So tell me a little bit more then about, we've all used PPE out in the field, but we just make assumptions that it's right or good or works well. So continue on along that line.
Okay, sure. So the PPE community has a variety of conformity assessment processes in place. And these manufacturers and consumer can be confident that a product meets these requirements because of these CA processes that are in place. For some industries, conformity assessment might also occur if a product already has demonstrated that it meets the requirements. And also, once they demonstrate that they meet the requirements, post-market activities are done to ensure that the requirements continue to be met. And that's something that's very important, conducting post-market activities, because once that product is in the field, you don't know if it continues to meet the requirements that it met when it was approved.
Got it. So, hey, I went on your website, and NIOSH has recently published a document that you guys call the NIOSH's PPE framework, a conformity assessment infrastructure. So how does the worker using the personal protective equipment in the field benefit from this research?
Okay, so the framework, first of all, it's important to understand that the framework has 5 steps. The first step is to identify the hazards. The second step is to select the PPE type. Then you select, after you select the PPE type, you select the standard that then that PPE is supposed to meet. And then once you select the standard that PPE meets, then you select the type of PPE that you're going to use, and then you conduct post-market activities once you have that product in place. So what it does, this framework does, is it allows industry to reflect on the adequacy of existing conformity assessment activities, and then the industry can propose changes based on the risk to the worker if they see that they need to do that. And the worker will benefit by having a consistent risk-based approach in place to more effectively provide workers the PPE they need to reduce exposures. And it also will elicit confidence that their PPE will provide the intended protection, as I mentioned earlier.
Got it. So a lot of our listeners are safety and health coordinators, safety managers, and their workers out there in the field have a lot of different personal protective equipment, all the way from hard hats, safety glasses, goggles, shields, respirators, all that. So how could they find out about this conformity assessment?
Well, they can go to our website to find out about it, first of all. That's the best place to find out about conformity assessment. And also working with manufacturers. So once they identify the PPE that they are using, talk to the manufacturers to make sure they understand what standards their PPE conforms with. And then also continue to talk to NIOSH too if they have additional questions.
Okay. Boy, this is great. So you have a lot of research that's been done, a lot of testing, a lot of material, and it's all free, right, on your website?
It is, yes. It is free on our website. And then we also have established what is called a PPE info database that has all of the personal protective equipment standards that can also be accessed. So if there's any questions the users have regarding what standards their PPE conforms to or what standards are applicable to their PPE, that is a very useful tool.
Okay. So for our folks out in the field, and they're trying to manage safety and health programs, can you kind of give us an idea how the practitioners out there would use the framework in some more detail?
Okay, sure. Well, the first 4 steps that we define in the document really map out a way of thinking that practitioners should be implementing when they are selecting or purchasing their PPE. They first make sure that they have fully characterized and defined their hazard exposure scenario. It's the first thing that needs to be done. Then after that, they should be selecting the PPE type that is most appropriate for their hazard exposure scenario. And in some cases, regulators may already have selected the PPE type that they need to use. But that's not true in all instances, as the practitioner who's left up to filling that gap. Then they select the performance standard that is relevant to both the hazard exposure and the scenario and the PPE type. And again, this is sometimes done by regulators, but there are still many instances when it's the practitioner who must review available standards, like I was mentioning with that PPE info database, and then determine what standard is appropriate for their exposure. As I mentioned, this PPE info tool is a very useful resource.
Boy, I appreciate that. So say you could quickly summarize the value that the NIOSH PPE framework has for our safety and health community and workers out there. What would that value be?
Well, I think that the framework provides recommendations and guidance for developing, structuring, and managing PPE conformity assessments in the United States. This framework can be tailored and applied to all PPE across the nation that protects workers from a variety of risks, regardless of the hazard, PPE type, or environment. The framework describes the foundational principles of conformity assessment that allows the processes to be developed that are reflective of the worker's actual risks, and it will aid the practitioners in selecting and purchasing PPE in areas with little oversight.
I think the one thing that you test and certify that all of our practitioners out here are most familiar with is respirators. And we're trying to buy the respirator that's NIOSH approved. And will you talk a little bit about what that process looks like?
Well, sure. A well-developed conformity assessment model does exist for respirators in the United States that actually dates back to 1910 with the U.S. Bureau of Mines. And we are the federal entity that has exclusive authority for testing and approving these respirators. And for those respirators used in the mining environments, we actually work jointly with MSHA for approving those respirators. So what we do is we conduct the research that ultimately leads to the standards for PPE, and then we develop performance requirements and quality assurance requirements. And then once a manufacturer submits an application for approval, we actually evaluate those quality assurance requirements, the performance application that comes in, we test and evaluate the product, and then once it is approved, we conduct those post-market activities to make sure that those products continue to meet the standards that they initially met when they were approved.
Wow, that makes sense, Maryann. As we just wrap up today's discussion, could you just give us a preview of what should we expect from NIOSH in the conformity assessment area in the future coming up?
Sure. PPE community should expect to continue to see NIOSH conduct scientific research to inform the first steps of the framework that I discussed earlier. And the way we will support these 4 steps is first by characterizing existing and emerging hazard exposure scenarios where there are priority gaps in the nation, evaluating PPE to determine if it will be protective against various hazard exposure scenarios, and then establishing evidence-based criteria for developing performance standards and continuing to maintain and enhance the PPE info database I mentioned earlier that allows members of the PPE community to search for standards that are relevant to their situations. And in the near term, what we intend to do is to take that checklist that is in the framework that talks about all 5 steps and has questions that practitioners should be asking themselves at each step and expand on that to provide additional guidance to users.
Well, Maryann, this has been very informative. Our guest today has been Maryann D. Alessandro, and she heads up the NIOSH National Personal Protective Technology Laboratory, NPPTL, and it's been great and informative having you here today. This has been Rick Gleason from the University of Washington, Region 10 OSHA Training Center, coming to you from the heartbeat of worker health and safety. And Maryann, thank you very much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate having the opportunity.
Okay, take care.
I was young and feisty, never did things by the book. Just let me get my toolbox and I'll take myself a look. I climbed up on the dozer with my mechanic's pride. Said, you can keep it running, friend, while I poke around inside. Shake hands with danger, meet a guy you ought to know. I used to laugh at safety, now they call me Three-Finger Joe. Though I learned a lesson, I forgot it soon enough. The nicks and burns and scratches showed the young ones I was tough. Till another morning, I was grinding on some steel. My other hand got careless and fed my skin into the wheel. Shake hands with danger, step right up and say hello. Grinding wheels and metal, I what made me Three-Finger Joe. I've seen mechanics burning and I've seen them take a fall just to save themselves a minute. I've seen them lose it all. I've watched them courting trouble, seen them take a chance and lose. They get careless for a moment, spend a lifetime with the blues. Shake hands with danger. Shake hands with danger. to know. Compared to them, I'm lucky to be just Three-Finger Joe.